Good afternoon. Welcome to the National Press Club, the place where news happens. I'm Emily Wilkins, congressional reporter for Bloomberg Government and membership secretary of the National Press Club. Thank you for joining us today for our virtual Headliners Newsmaker with Democratic National Committee Chairman Jaime Harrison. We are taking questions from the audience today. If you have a question for the chairman, please email headliners, that's plural, headliners, at press.org. It is now just a few hours before President Joe Biden's first speech to a joint session of Congress, when the president will lay out a legislative package that includes policies meant to assist workers and their families, with the numerous measures including child care, paid leave, free preschool, and free 2 years of community college. The package will be a key legislative focus for Democrats in the next year, but it also sets the tone for the 2022 midterms, when Republicans have an upper hand in taking back the House and Senate, thanks to a combination of history favoring the minority party during midterms and redistricting. That brings us to DNC Chairman Jaime Harrison, a key player in the 2022 election after his groundbreaking 2020 Senate run, which put deep red South Carolina on the map of battleground states and Senator Lindsey Graham on the defense. Despite a strong campaign and record-breaking fundraising, Jaime Harrison did lose, but Democrats are hoping the approach that he used to inspire South Carolinians can help Democrats nationwide in the upcoming midterms. That's why he was named chairman of the DNC at the start of this year, and he's already gotten to work, announcing a 50-state strategy aimed at electing Democrats up and down the ballot, including those in red states like South Carolina. Part of Jaime Harrison's draw is his story. He was born to a single mother in South Carolina and was raised primarily by his grandparents. Although he grew up poor, he received a scholarship to attend Yale University. Interested in politics from a young age, he was mentored by a giant in South Carolina politics, Congressman Jim Clyburn, whom he worked for on Capitol Hill. In 2013, Jaime Harrison was elected to lead the South Carolina Democratic Party, making history as the state party's first Black chair. And he's also a State Fair prize-winning baker for his famous red velvet cake. We are looking forward to hearing more. Jaime Harrison, welcome to the National Press Club. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Madam Secretary, thank you so much. Emily, thank you for that introduction. And thank you, National Press Club, for having me today. You know, I'm honored and I'm truly humbled to join all of you. I glanced through the list of previous speakers, and you know, this could just as easily be called the History Maker program. You know, it's certainly a long way from where I grew up in Orangeburg, South Carolina. As Emily mentioned, my mom had me as a teenager, and we lived with my grandparents growing up. Neither of my grandparents made it to high school. My grandmother picked cotton and my grandfather paved roads. Most of my childhood was spent just trying to get by. I remember days when I had to do my homework in the dark because our power was turned off, or we had to pour water on our cereal because we couldn't afford milk. There were days when we scrambled around the house looking through couch cushions to just find enough change to put gas in my grandfather's car so he could get to work. Nothing ever came easy. Everyone in my house worked hard, and there was a lot of stress and uncertainty. But through it all, we always had hope. That's one of the greatest things about this country, my friends. It's hope. Hope that better days are ahead. Hope is the bedrock of America. You can't pursue a more perfect union without hope. The thing is that the average American isn't tracking every vote on the floor of the House of Representatives or in the US Senate, or digging into each party's campaign platform. The average American is looking for opportunity. It's up to our leaders to represent our best interests and to make our opportunity their priority. That's how you achieve the American dream. Now, my friends, as you know, our mission at the DNC is to elect Democrats to every office around the country. And 4 years ago, we had our work cut out for us, but we organized and we engaged and we fought back. Republicans were in power, but they were not leading. They put their own individual interests ahead of the people they represent. When faced with a once-in-a-century global crisis, what did they do? Not nearly enough. Schools closed. Businesses disappeared. Families lost loved ones. What did they do? They failed to meet the moment when the country so desperately needed their leadership. You know, my grandmother often said, you don't throw a rock and try to hide your hand. Republicans love causing trouble, and then they disappear when people call them out for it. But a funny thing happened in 2020. Americans said they were sick of it all. They were sick of people in power who did nothing but talk. They are sick of elected officials who are only interested in maintaining their own power and relevance. And they sure as hell is sick of politicians playing games with their lives. Folks, in this country, they don't want words. They want action. It's as simple as that. Actions over words. And when times are tough and you need leadership the most, it's been the Democrats that have proved that they will show up and that they will deliver. They were able to walk back the mistakes of the past and right so many wrongs. Since President Biden took office and Democrats took charge, we have created more than 1 million jobs and provided relief to 4 million small businesses struggling to keep their doors open. We've announced a once-in-a-generation investment in infrastructure to make America more competitive and help create millions more jobs. And through the Biden administration's quick action and the backing of a Democratic Congress, we have signed the American Rescue Plan into law, which is the most significant legislation for working families in modern history. Families are being lifted up and out of poverty. Experts say it will cut child poverty in half by next year. Kids and teachers are back in the classroom, and more than 200 million vaccinations have been administered in the president's first 100 days. This all came about through Democratic leadership, the same leadership that created policies that allowed a kid like me to go from studying with the lights off to Yale University to becoming DNC chair. Now I'm in a position to help Democratic leaders prioritize opportunity for kids who are growing up just like I did. But I'm not just here to celebrate what we've accomplished so far. I'm also here to talk about how we are going to continue to expand on those victories. The Democratic Party is going to make its earliest and largest investment ever in a midterm election. Today, I am proud to announce our first round of investments in this midterm. Over the next year, we will invest $20 million in midterm programs. That's before we even get to the 2022 general election. It will go towards electing Democrats in 2022 while laying the groundwork for 2024, 2030, and beyond. With that investment, we're going to take the fight directly to the Republicans. We are going to be nimble and forward-thinking with both our strategy and our resources. And we're going to build and maintain a consistent presence in communities all around the country. My friends, this ain't your grandmama's DNC. We are planning to play a bigger role than ever before in midterm elections. We're going to put our cash to work early to double the time our programs have to engage voters. In some states, that means building campaign infrastructure 6 months to a year in advance. In other states, that means starting right now. We will be doing more than ever before to support state parties around the country and to work with our sister organizations to compete in top battlefields. Our primary investment is going to be protecting the right to vote. Because in 2022, the battle isn't just over who you vote for, it's over whether you can even vote at all. At the center of America's very essence is the right of the people to choose who represents them. It's a foundational principle that makes our country what it is. But every day, we see Republicans doing whatever they can to suppress voters and work against our nation's best interests. We're seeing it, and we're seeing it already, and we're seeing it in Georgia. They are making absentee voting harder. They're adding technicalities that could disqualify legitimate votes. They have turned voting into a partisan issue. Voting rights should not be a partisan issue. Let me say that again. Voting rights should not be a partisan issue. It shouldn't be an issue at all. It should just be. But we've seen this movie before, folks. You know, my grandfather used to tell me stories about efforts to suppress the vote in South Carolina. These weren't isolated incidents. No matter how hard he tried, he was up against a system built to keep him from voting. He and I used to always vote together. Voting turned out to be one of the very last things that I did with my grandfather before he passed away. You know, after going to the polls one time, we sat on his porch and he looked at me and he said this. He said, Jamie, never let anybody tell you that you don't matter. Never let anyone tell you that you don't count, because you do matter. You know, I've carried those words with me ever since. You matter. If we want American democracy to thrive, we must fight so that every vote matters. We must fight so that every person matters. We must fight so that our grandchildren aren't enduring the hardships suffered by our grandparents. So my friends, with every ounce of determination, with every breath in my body, I'm committed to make sure that we do not go back. We will not return to the days of Jim Crow. My kids and your kids will not live under a system where their voices and their votes do not matter. The DNC is committed to lifting up every single voter in this country and guaranteeing fair and informed access to the ballot box. We're fighting every day to restore and protect the fundamental right to vote. As chair, it's my priority to carry forward the good work we've been doing and to build on the progress we've made. In 2020, we implemented our most comprehensive on-the-ground infrastructure ever. We had voter protection staff in 33 states. We invested heavily in technology and data tools, and we're able to proactively reach out to states without resources to help keep a watchful eye on voter suppression efforts. We expanded our national voter hotline and launched a new voter registration and purge tracker. We improved our voter registration platform, iwillvote.com. We expanded in-person and mail-in voting options, and we combated the challenges presented by COVID-19. In addition, we filed litigation across the country to protect voting rights of all Americans. All of that amounted to the biggest voter protection program ever. In 2022, we're going to make it even bigger. We will fund voter protection staff in critical states like Arizona, Michigan, North Carolina, Nevada, and Pennsylvania. We will expand more broadly, and by the summer, we will fund dozens of staff members on the ground for the 2022 election. And we will be doing more than simply watching the polls. Voter protection means education, access, and advocacy. The DNC is no longer waiting for the fight to come to us. We'll be spending more this year proactively defending every American's right to vote. Another major investment will be modernizing the organizing process, because 2022 will be an entirely different landscape from previous election years. If there was any blessing of the past year, it was that everyone learned that there's more than one way to do things. Even a large national organization can adapt quickly to the changing times. Knocking on doors is not the only way to reach voters. We will build on the remarkable virtual organizing efforts in 2020 and create earlier and broader opportunities for activists to engage than ever before. We have 200,000 active online volunteers who are ready to work right now. And we'll see what they can do in Virginia and in New Jersey and in special elections this year. And we anticipate that number growing exponentially by next summer. We will also work earlier than ever before to re-engage and expand on the Biden coalition in 2022. Now, what does that all mean? For one thing, it means that folks should get used to our emails and text messages. Sorry, everybody. It also means that there's a lot of information out there, and we're going to take advantage of it. We're not going to chase gut feelings about the last election. We're going to gather and study and build a hub of knowledge so that future campaigns can apply lessons learned and see elections won. Now, this doesn't mean we're all abandoning, we're abandoning all of our previous campaign strategies. In fact, we're not dictating strategy at all. We're providing resources. We're building a library of knowledge and a coalition of people that are available to all Democrats. Whether you are progressive, moderate, or somewhere in between, we're going to help you get elected. And we're not just talking about Washington. Through our efforts with state parties, we want to help elect Democrats to school boards, county councils, state legislatures, and every other office on the ballot. The DNC is the party of progress, so it's only natural that we continue to seek ways to modernize the campaign process. Our other large investment will go towards a new approach to organizing, because in 2022, grassroots campaigning will be the rule and not the exception. Now, I will be the first to admit that for a long time, the DNC's model needed work. We laid low until elections, sometimes even during the elections. Now, I don't mean we weren't working tirelessly for opportunity, equality, and justice. I mean, no one knew we were doing the work at all. Let me change that right now, and let me speak directly to the American people. The Democratic Party is working for you. The Democratic Party represents your interests. The Democratic Party actually gives a damn about you and your family and your community. Years ago, some of you have heard me tell this story, but years ago, I was knocking on doors in a rural county in South Carolina, and I came upon a shotgun house on an old dirt road. And an older African-American man answered the door, and he said to me, he said, "Son, who are you and what do you want?" I said, "Sir, I'm Jaime Harrison, and I'm canvassing on behalf of the Democrats." And he said, "Okay, but what do you want?" I said, "Sir, this is the most consequential election." And he cut me off and he said, "Son, let me tell you something." He said, "Do you see that road you drove up on?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "What kind of road is that?" I said, "It's a dirt road, sir." He said, "Son, that was a dirt road when Ronald Reagan was president, when both Bushes were president. It was a dirt road when Bill Clinton and Barack Obama were president. Son, it's still a goddamn dirt road. And until either a Democrat or Republican pays my road, I don't want to have to deal with any of you." And he shut his door. I was in my feelings a little bit, but as I walked away, I thought to myself, the most important thing to this man was his dirt road. For someone else in town, it might be internet access. For someone across the country, it might be better schools. So many people face hardships, and Republicans talk, and that's all they do is talk, and they never deliver. But from the moment President Biden and I discussed the future of the DNC, I have been a broken record in saying that the Democratic Party can't just be a political organization. We have to be a community organization where we address the everyday needs of people across this country. And that, my friends, requires a year-round presence. We plan to invest millions in early organizing programs distributed around the country. And these programs will be the seeds for local Democratic voices to come together and to grow stronger as we move closer to Election Day. We will also invest in local talent because it's much easier to contact your local Democratic Party if your neighbor is an active member of that party. We are committed to building on the pipelines of diverse local talent that we started back in 2019. And we want our bench to be deep. We are looking for future leaders who know and reflect the communities they wish to serve. That means making efforts outside of the traditional recruiting pipeline and empowering more locals to stand up and speak out. Our programs in 2020 trained more than 1,000 prospective staff and helped ensure that every battleground state team looked like its electorate. We're going to arm all of that local talent with resources to keep building and to keep making those connections. For 2022, we're going to empower our organizers to build a foundation of relationships right now, long before the election enters the mind of average voters. We want to use this time to learn all that we can about communities and their needs and how we can best serve them. We're going to take our direction from the people who know the communities best. As Democratic campaigns start to come together around the country, they can look to our dedicated communication staff to help spread their messages far and wide. We plan to have staff on the ground in Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Michigan, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin as soon as possible, with more states to follow this summer. Our first test for this new approach will be this year in Virginia, where we're focused on holding the House of Delegates and keeping a Democrat in the governor's mansion. We've made a six-figure investment to help launch the Virginia Turnout Project. This is an important foundation for the general election. Our investments are helping to strengthen organizing efforts in targeted districts while also building a diverse talent pipeline. And we're going to protect the right to vote. The DNC is not going to cede a single seat. We're not going to ignore a single community. We're going to reach out to each and every American and to make sure that we have a strong connection. Just like President Biden, we are going to unite rather than divide. We're going to tell everyone who will listen that if you stand for opportunity, if you stand for safety, if you stand for hope for a better future, then you stand with the Democratic Party. I'd like to close by mentioning my grandfather one more time. He used to watch a lot of news, and every evening I'd watch with him. It's where my love of politics comes from. I was just a little round-headed boy watching TV with his grandfather. He passed away in 2004. If he could see me today, talking with the world's leading organization for journalists, 1 hour with the people who report the news. So thank you again. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. You will never know how much this means to me, and I look forward to the conversation ahead.
Thank you so much, Chairman Harrison. Clearly, President Biden has a high bar to clear if he would like to give the best speech of the day later this evening. I want to go back and focus a little bit because you made some news there in announcing that $20 million investment, sort of getting in early before the cycle starts. And kind of have two things I want to dig into a bit on that. You mentioned that the DNC is hoping to spend more than any election before. Is there a target that you are looking to spend throughout the entirety of the 2022 midterms? And how do you see that breakdown going between Senate races, House races, the local races that you were discussing, as well as the voter rights and voter turnout efforts, which are obviously very key to the DNC this time?
Well, you know, we are still working on the budget for the 2022 midterms, but we've already sat down with the heads of the DCCC, the DGA, and the DSCC. We will have conversations with the DMO, our mayors, the DLCC, and all of our sister committees. For the first time in a long time, this DNC is going to work in a collective and cohesive manner to make sure that we have the resources. But let me say what is so special here. The reason why we're able to do this is because we have gotten the green light from President Biden to do anything and all that we can do in order to support Democrats up and down the ballot in the 2022 cycle. He's not on the ballot this election cycle, but other Democrats are. And he wants me to make sure that we are working as hard as we possibly can to invest in Democrats all up and down the ballot.
Well, Jaime, I also want to definitely go back and talk about 2022 as well as voting rights a little bit later. But I know that obviously one of the big news of today is the big event that's coming up with President Biden at 9 p.m. in his address to Congress. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that a little bit. And since you're the chair of the DNC and you have the campaign focus on everything, I wanted to look through at this speech through the lens of the next election. What group of voters does President Biden need to reach tonight, and what does his message to them need to be?
Well, you know, the group of voters that the president wants to reach are all American citizens. From day one, this president has been focused on uniting this country and bringing folks together, particularly of various political ideologies. I mean, he's been focused because the American people are in desperate need right now. When we started, I mean, just think about this. Remember on January 20th, when he made the oath of office, I remember just watching Dr. Fauci on TV talking about COVID and how he didn't believe that we would get to the point where we are now until maybe this late fall or the winter, or maybe at the beginning of next year. But look at where we are now. Over 200 million vaccinations. Half of American adults are now vaccinated. We are leading the world where we were actually behind the rest of the world in terms of progress on COVID. Now the rest of the world is looking for America's leadership, where we always deserve to be. And so we can say that it has happened because of Joe Biden. Because at the end of the day, you look at the American Rescue Plan, where he focused on, you know, putting money in pockets, vaccines and arms, opening our schools, securing our jobs. He was successful in doing that. And that success is being borne out in terms of the polls. Overwhelmingly, all Americans are supportive of those efforts. we see the same type of support for the American Jobs Act. And I think we'll see the same type of support for the American Families Plan that the president will talk about as well. And so he's doing a great job. And many people outside of Lindsey Graham believe that this president is doing a good job. And I'm proud of it. And I'm proud that he will continue to speak to those folks. And the DNC, in terms of our efforts, will continue to put that message out to the American people so that all Americans are educated on what this administration has accomplished, what this Democratic Congress has accomplished, and how not one Republican supported these efforts. Now, some of them have tried to take credit for it, as you all know, but they didn't vote for it. And my job is to make sure that the voters understand that. Who was responsible to help them and their families and their communities in their most desperate time? And it was Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Democrats in the House and the Senate.
I actually want to dig into that a little bit, Jamie, because I remember that when President Biden was still candidate Biden, one of the big parts of his message was bipartisanship, that he was a senator, that he had worked with Republicans across the aisle, that he could do so again, that he was going to be able to unite the country. And yet, so far, we saw the $1.9 trillion coronavirus package pass, as you just mentioned, without a single Republican vote. We've already seen Republicans sort of say absolutely no way to Biden's tax plan. Infrastructure, there are some debates about that at this point, but nothing solid yet in terms of actual bipartisanship. Is it going to hurt President Biden, and is it going to hurt moderate Democrats if they can't go back to voters in the next election and say, look, we did find a way to work with Republicans?
Well, I think it's the reverse. The question is, because when you look at Joe Biden's policies, they're overwhelmingly supported by Democrats, Republicans, and independents. I think voters are going to go to the Republicans and say, well, listen, I supported Joe Biden helping us out in our greatest time of need. I supported Joe Biden filling that pothole that is as large as a truck that I have to drive over each and every day. I support Joe Biden in his efforts to make sure that families have all that they need in order to be successful in this economy. Why didn't you vote for it? Why didn't you support it? Because I do. I, the Republican, I, the independent, I, the Democrat, support that effort. Why didn't you support the effort? And so I don't think the onus is on Joe Biden in terms of being bipartisan, because being bipartisan means that you got two sides that are trying to find ways to work together. What these Republicans have done is the same thing that they did when Barack Obama came to the White House as well. President Obama tried to be bipartisan also. But what these Republicans have done is brought off Mitch McConnell's old playbook, brushed it off, and thought that they could be utilize that to interact with Joe Biden. But what the president is focused on is addressing the needs of the American people. That is his number one priority, and that is what he's going to do. And so we ask our Republican friends and colleagues, join us in that effort. But if they're not, we're still going to be focused on the most important thing that we have, which is the American people.
I also wanted to ask just about this package of bills in general, the infrastructure component, the social infrastructure component. How important is that to be passed before 2022? I imagine if it is passed, it's going to be a part of a lot of the messaging, a lot of the, hey, we did this, we did that. But I know it's also not a guarantee at this point. I mean, getting all 50 Democrats on board, you have very, very little room for error. You have Democrats are a big tent party, so it's pretty expansive. I mean, if Democrats aren't able to get this bill passed, what does that mean for the next election?
Well, we're going to focus on doing what we have to do in order to get it passed. You know, in the end of the day, the American people want this administration. They want Congress to deliver. We remember for the past 4 years that, every week in the Trump administration was infrastructure week and no pothole was ever filled, right? Joe Biden does not want that. He wants to actually get things done on behalf of the American people. I got senators here in South Carolina who will talk about, the need for broadband. Senator Scott and Senator Graham talk about the need for broadband, but years have gone by and 38% of rural South Carolina still does not have broadband. So folks are tired of talk, just like that old man that I met years ago. They are tired of people talking about paving the dirt roads. They want somebody to pave the damn road. And that's what Joe Biden's doing. He is pushing this legislation because he knows that the fatigue in this country and how it is dragging down our economy. And that's why he is moving forward. We have delivered already on some of the promises that Joe Biden has made to the American people. And he's going to continue to work for delivering for the American people. So either the Republicans can, this train is going. And my grandfather used to tell me something about train. He said, Jamie, either you get on the train, you sit on the sidelines and watch the train, or you try to stand in front of the train. But nonetheless, understand this, son, the train is moving. This train is moving. We are going to address the needs of the American people. And we want Republicans to join us in that effort. But if they're not, we're still going to address the needs of the American people.
I mean, isn't that though a little bit, that doesn't really sound like negotiating then, or it doesn't really sound like bipartisan to say, hey, look, the train's leaving. You're either on the train, off the train. I don't care, but the train is going. I mean, shouldn't the conversation be a little bit more about listening to what Republicans have to say, trying to make some concessions to get Republicans on board?
Well, Emily, we're doing a lot of listening, but the question is, does the other side actually want a deal? You remember what Mitch McConnell said when Barack Obama became president, that they were going to make sure that he was a one-term president and that he wouldn't have any victories. It's kind of hard to negotiate with folks with that type of mentality, because it should be about what are we doing in order to improve the lives of the American people. That's what Joe Biden is focused on. So if there are some Republicans in Congress who are focusing on improving the lives of the American people, then they have an audience and they have a partner in Joe Biden. They have an audience and a partners with the Democratic leadership, because that is our number one goal. But we're not in it just to give them a political talking point so that they can go back and say, oh, well, see, they didn't get anything done. That's not what this is all about. This isn't about politics. It's about the lives of the people in this nation. And that's what Joe Biden is focused on. So if people want to play the DC political games, then they can play that. If they want to read Dr. Seuss and play with Mr. Potato Head dolls, they can do that too, while Joe Biden does the work of the American people, because that's what they want him to do. That's what they send people to Congress to do. And in the end of the day, if they don't, then the job comes to me, because I'm going to help make the case to the American people of how these Republicans have stood in the way of the progress. For 4 years, we were told we were going to have infrastructure week. For 4 years, nothing got done in terms of infrastructure. Joe Biden and the American people were tired of that, and they're ready for action right now. We demonstrated that we can act for the American people with the American Rescue Plan. We're going to demonstrate that with the American Jobs Plan. We're going to demonstrate that with the American Family Plan, because people in this country finally want some leaders who will focus on them first.
Got it. And I want to talk a little bit more too about 2022, although I do want to take a minute and sort of look back to 2020. I covered the races from a national perspective, both in the House and the Senate. I remember going into the election night and even months before then, I was covering all these races, yours, Susan Collins up in Maine, in Iowa, and a lot of people were saying this is going to be great for Democrats. They're going to flip all of these seats. They're going to clearly, take back the Senate with a nice, strong majority. And then that didn't wind up happening, despite the good numbers, poll numbers, the good fundraising, the sort of vibe out there that Democrats had this in the bag. I'm wondering if you can say sort of what you feel happened with 2020 and how is the DNC going to avoid those same mistakes in 2022?
Well, I want to pull back a little bit. I mean, overall for the Democratic Party, it was a great night. A much better night for the Democrats than it was for the Republicans, because think about what happened for them. They lost the White House. They lost the U.S. Senate in January, and Democrats were able to maintain control in the House of Representatives. Now, yes, we did not win all the seats that we wanted to win, yours truly included. But nonetheless, we saw that there were some victories, and those victories are allowing us right now to deliver for the American people. Now, what my job is as the chair of the DNC is to look back at what worked and what did not work, and how we can improve that going into the 2022 cycle. There were a number of things that were challenges, right? That COVID was one of them. Whereas many Democrats did not have an on-the-ground presence or a strong canvassing program because of the precautions we were taking. We didn't want to endanger the lives of voters, and we didn't want to endanger the lives of our workers knocking on doors, because we're still learning more about COVID and what we could do and what we couldn't do. And I think that may have chilled some of the gains that we should have won as a result. But nonetheless, we figured this out. We figured it out in Georgia, and that's how we were able to buck history. Folks told me that, historically, Democrats don't win runoff elections in Georgia. Well, not only did we win one, we won two. And we did it because we had a democratic ecosystem that decided to work together. We knocked on doors, we engaged digitally, we had radio and TV and mail, and we did all of those things. And we're taking that playbook that we had in Georgia, and we're going to replicate that in the 2022 cycle. So I'm feeling very positive about how we move forward on this. We have the resources to do it. We're going to engage early. Again, we just announced this unprecedented $20 million investment in terms of early investment, in terms of moving into the midterms. We're going to start our coalition building earlier. In the past, I'm sure, Emily, you've heard the criticism of the Democratic Party. Why are they just sending people to our community 3 months before the election? Well, folks, we are going to end that right now. We're going to start sending people to your community now, not 3 months before the election, right now. And they're going to start building the ties that they need. We're also going to start embedding people into the communities now in voter protection. We see that the Republicans are coming after the voting rights of Americans. And so we are going to send some of our staff into these states right now, embedded into these communities, to make sure that we're setting up systems to protect their rights to vote. We're going to have communication staff and finance staff and tech staff right now embedded in those communities. So I'm really, really excited going in. I know what the history is, but I also know that we can make our own history. And that's what we're doing right now.
I want to touch a little bit on voting rights, because I know that's been a huge conversation in DC as well as elsewhere. Georgia state legislature passed a number of pieces of legislation that a lot of people have said that it's going to make it more difficult for minority voters to cast ballots. Now we're seeing another fight over a voting rights bill in Texas. How is the DNC, are you guys getting involved in these efforts at all at the state level? And how much impact do you expect for these types of laws to have on what your turnout's going to look like in future elections?
Well, we are fighting, the DNC and our state parties are fighting these battles in state houses across the country. We will fight these battles in courthouses as well. We will also fight these battles in the houses of Congress because we have to. As I mentioned earlier in my remarks, the foundational right we have as American citizens is our right to vote. It is the most sacred right in which all other rights are built upon. And when you chip away at it, everything else falls down in terms of the American experience. I remember when I was a young staffer on the Hill, or even prior to being a young staffer on the Hill, I remember when we went into Iraq and the Republicans in the House would run to the floor of the House of Representatives and talk about the fact that the Iraqis were dipping their fingers in the purple ink and proclaiming, see, it was American forces that allowed these people to vote. And it was a moment of pride. All the while, we send our sons and daughters overseas, risking their lives, risking their limbs. And all the while, the Republican Party is doing every damn thing that they can here in this country to prohibit people from voting in this nation. And that is not right. It is fundamentally un-American. It is not who we are as a people. And I am totally fine. I am fine with a 100% voter participation in this country. I hope every eligible person who can vote in this nation votes, because I'm confident enough in the Democratic Party and in our ideals, in our policies, to be able to get into the arena and to defend those things in front of the American people. The Republican Party, on the other hand, isn't comfortable with that. And they believe that the only way that they can win, is by cheating. And so you see this rash of voter integrity laws because they lost the last election. That's why we see this. But we're going to fight and do everything that we can to keep this from happening.
You mentioned very quickly there that there is legislation right now at the federal level in Congress. The bill is H.R. 1. It's for the People Act. It has already passed the House. It is now, the attention is in the Senate. This is a really wide ranging bill but just to touch on a couple things that it does. It talks about mail-in voting. It tries to make redistricting process a little bit less partisan. Jaime, I wanted to see how critical is it for 2022 that this bill find a way to pass Congress and get to President Biden's desk for his signature?
Emily, this is transformational and a tremendous piece of legislation because it will open up voting in this country and protect the rights of all Americans. You know, we fundamentally don't believe that billionaires should be able to buy elections in this country. And that's what H.R. 1 begins to address. We fundamentally also believe that, you know, maybe politicians shouldn't choose their voters and maybe the voters should choose those folks who represent them. That is also a really, really important component as well. And so, you know, let's take the big money out of politics. Let's open up voting so that it's easier for people to exercise their right to vote instead of making it much more difficult. And so we're going to do all that we can to get this bill passed because it would tremendously alleviate so much pressure off of Americans to exercise their right and to have some confidence in the elections going forward. And we see that the Republicans are doing everything that they can to fight back and fight against these efforts. And it's because their big donors, the Koch brothers and all these other folks don't want it because that means then they can't buy these elections. We know that it's overwhelmingly popular with the American people. We're going to continue to do all that we can to get this done so that the president can sign this legislation and fundamentally transform how we conduct our elections in this country.
You know, there is one way that we could potentially get this voter legislation done. If it has 50 votes in the Senate, Democrats could eliminate the filibuster, that 60 vote threshold that currently requires that they get 10 Republicans with them on any legislation that's passed sort of through the non-budget resolution manner. I'm wondering, Jaime, is that an option that Democrats need to explore? Is the voting rights bill this important that they should really be giving some serious thought to ending the filibuster just to get that bill through?
Well, you know, Leader Schumer said in terms of, and I leave a lot of this to him because this is in his ballpark. He said that all options are on the table in terms of consideration to get things through. But I can tell you on a personal level, I would love to see Lindsey Graham and some of these people stand up in the floor mimicking Strom Thurmond to filibuster voting rights legislation in this country. There's one bill, H.R. 4, which is a John Lewis Voting Advancement Act, which is addressing the holes that are in the Voting Rights Act. Let's see these people stand up in the middle of the floor and filibuster that. You know, stand up all night fighting against voting rights, equal voting rights in this country. And it will demonstrate to the American people who they are. As I mentioned earlier, my grandma talked about people throwing rocks and hiding their hands. Well, that's what they can do right now in this issue of the filibuster. They can say, oh, I'm going to filibuster, and then fly home the next day and not have that legislation considered. If you believe that this is legislation that should not be considered in the United States Senate, stand up and talk about it. Talk about it until you can't talk about it anymore. But you got to have some skin in the game. You got to stand up and let the American people hear your reasons for voting. You know, I've heard them say that they're going to filibuster the Equality Act. What are your reasons for filibustering something? To give everybody equal rights. You know, Thomas Jefferson said all people. He said all men. I said all people are created equal. Well, why can't we have an act, an Equality Act that codifies that? And if you are against it, filibuster it. So, and stand up and defend it.
So it sounds like then you might be for a talking filibuster, one that would actually require the members protesting bill to be on the Senate floor, be talking, be actually delaying that bill, rather than, as you said, just sort of putting in their opposition and then flying home.
I think that's where most American people are. I think, you know, when you say the filibuster, I think most Americans think that. But the process has changed. But I think we got to go back to, you have to stand up and be able to defend what you're doing and how you're blocking legislation that could dramatically impact the lives of the American people.
Got it. I want to take this minute because we've got about 15 minutes left with the chairman. If you have any questions for him, please send that to headliners with a S, it's plural, headliners at press.org, not .com. Just looking forward to hearing any audience questions. Please go ahead and send them in. But Jamie, I wanted to actually pivot a little bit to some of the messaging that Democrats have had. You did a podcast recently with the Daily Beast where you told them that the Democratic brand is, quote, not the greatest. And in that interview, you mentioned how Republicans managed to convince voters, including voters in South Carolina, in regards to your own campaign, that Democrats like yourself supported defunding the police, even though that is not a position that you hold. How do Democrats successfully come back against these Republican attacks? And how do you fix the party's brand so it is, again, great?
Yeah. Well, I think overall, the Democratic Party is probably the strongest it's been in a very, very long time. You just look at the latest polling, the greatest number of people who are identifying as Democrats. President with approval way over 50%. Control of the House, the Senate, and the White House. And so we have a great foundation by which to build on. But for most folks who know me, they know that I'm not going to rest on my laurels. We can be better. We can do better. We can build a bigger tent for our party, and we need to reach out. And there's some areas where we need to do better in. There's some communities that are at the base of our party where they need to understand that we see them, that we hear them, that we value them. And so that's what I want us to focus on, is how do we build an even better and more robust Democratic Party? How can we add to our majorities in the House and the Senate? And part of the way I think we do that, Emily, is by delivering. It's important that the promises that were made, that the president was able to make during this last campaign that we made in the House and the Senate, are promises that we do our very best to keep, and that the American people see that we are doing our best to keep, and that we're doing things in order to improve their lives. You take rural communities, for instance, and many times people ask me, well, Jamie, what kind of Democrat are you? And I say, I'm a dirt road Democrat. I grew up off of a dirt road. I understand the joys and also the hardships of growing up in rural America. I think we can do a better job of expanding our outreach and our strength in rural America. And that has not been, over the past few years, a strong suit for the Democratic Party. Partly, I think, by addressing the issues, I think by first showing up to those communities, but two, addressing the issues that they really care about. Because right now, the Republicans talk about their issues, but they don't do anything for it. So the issue of broadband, the issue that rural hospitals are closing, that some of these communities are living with toxic septic tanks and all of these things, those are issues that Joe Biden is addressing in the American Rescue Plan, in the American Jobs Plan, in the American Families Plan. So we get those things enacted, and then we have to do the job of going to those communities and saying, we hear you, we see you, and we have fought for you. We are now delivering things to help improve the conditions in your communities. I think we do that. We take a large step forward to rebuilding our brand in some of these communities and strengthening our relationships with those folks, and actually having them to then come out and vote for more Democrats in the elections.
Got it. So what I'm hearing, at least knowing what's in the infrastructure bill, the broadband, the water, the roads, and the highways, it sounds like what you're saying is that to rebuild their brand in some of these rural areas, it's important to actually get things done, namely this infrastructure proposal that's on the table and that the president will be speaking more about tonight.
That's exactly right.
Got it. I also know I want to make sure we touch on this because we did get some news this week. Now that the 2020 census is complete, the redistricting process is about to begin. Just for the uninitiated, basically it means that they take a look at the number of representatives in each state, and then they redistribute those based on the state's new populations, how it changed from 2010 to 2020. And what we saw with this process, number one, Republicans have a bit of an edge. They do hold the majority of state houses and governorships. And we saw red states like Texas and in this last election, Florida picked up seats, while Democratic states like New York and California lost their seats. Jamie, what's the DNC's plan as states get underway with actually redrawing these district lines. What role does the DNC play here, and how are you going to try and make sure that this process doesn't wind up leaving Democrats in the dust?
Yeah. Well, this issue of the census is one that I've studied a long time, since I was a congressional staffer. The sad part is, just like right now, we are seeing Republican efforts to suppress voters. We saw over the past year or so, Republican efforts to suppress voices in the census. The shortened timeline, given the urgency of COVID and the difficulties that COVID presented to census workers, instead of extending out the deadline for these efforts, the Trump administration shortened those deadlines. They also engage in intimidation practices on immigrant communities in this country. And so what we saw is that there's some communities that probably have huge undercounts in terms of the census, not because of their own efforts, but because of our own government trying to keep those voices silenced in the census. And that's problematic. But the second thing is, I tell my Republican friends, don't overplay your hand, because what the census is also demonstrating is something that I've talked about for a long time. Particularly, many folks have heard me talk about this New South. And you see that many of the states that gained seats were Southern states. Well, that means people or populations are moving to those communities in that part of the country. The question is, who are those individuals? Yes, they are moving into communities that are right now Republican, but are those folks who are moving in actually Republican? Are they voting Republican? What we are seeing is a reverse migration that is taking place. African Americans whose great-great-grandfathers and grandmothers moved to the industrial Midwest and the Northeast in the 19-teens and the 1920s, those folks are now moving back down south to areas like Atlanta and to Charlotte and to Charleston. And they are bringing their much more moderate politics into bear, and they're changing the politics of the South. And so, yes, these Southern states will add add more populations, more congressional seats, but that population is also considerably more Democratic than probably the population that was there before. And so we are working hand in glove with our leaders in state houses, in state chambers, along with the NDRC and others, to make sure that we push for fair maps, that we allow these maps to be drawn so that politics is taken out of the equation and we can just focus on the people. We believe in fair maps, and that's the way it should be.
Real quick, I mean, you mentioned some of the ways the Trump administration did influence the 2020 census. Should President Biden redo the census, or is this something that the DNC is considering potentially taking to court in some cases?
I'm not sure about whether or not the administration is considering redoing the census. I haven't heard anything of that sort. As it relates to,
should they consider redoing it? Do you think that would be a thing, something that needs to happen to really count all of these voices?
I'm very disturbed by the fact that a lot of voices were not counted. And so, I hope under this administration, they'll figure out how we adjust and make sure that those communities that desperately need services, because I don't know if folks know that, federal dollars are also allocated based on census tracts. On where populations are. And so that means that some of these communities won't get the resources that they probably need because of the undercount. So I hope that the administration will take that into account in terms of looking at how they adjust federal allocations to fit the undercounts that may have taken place. But again, I leave that to the administration to determine whether or not they are going to reopen that. I'm not sure of that or not. But nonetheless, the DNC is going to move forward. I'm a spades player, and I often tell people that you play the hand that you're dealt, not the hand that you wish you had. And so we have this hand, we are dealt with this hand, and we're going to try to do our very best to win with the hand that we got.
Well, Jaime, this has been a great conversation. I've got one final question for you, but before I do, I want to get all of the thank yous and coming ups out of the way. So a moment to thank the organizers of today's event. Headliners, co-team leaders, Donna Lanewan and Lori Russo, today's headliner event coordinator, Bob Wiener, and club member Ben Lasky, Club Communications Director, Lindsay Underwood, and Club Executive Director, Bill McCarran. Thank you all so much for this event today. I also want to let everyone know about some upcoming Press Club headliners. Tomorrow we have a very special event with the mothers of NPR, Susan Stamberg, Nina Totenberg, and Linda Wertheimer, along with author Lisa Nepoli, whose new book explores their extraordinary story. On May 10th, 11 a.m., we'll hear from Republican Representative Adam Kinzinger, who will address the future of the Republican Party and other issues facing the nation. I'm interviewing him, so very excited for that one. I hope that you all join us for that. Jaime, thank you again for your time today. The last thing I want to say, I know that we're still a little early into 2022. You were one of the rising stars of 2020. Who are the rising stars of 2022 going to be? Who is the next Jaime Harrison that we all need to start looking at right now?
Well, listen, this is one of the things, because I don't want to get in trouble for naming names. We still got primaries that we got to get through. But one of the trend lines that I think you should see is that there are going to be more African Americans running on a statewide basis. And I think that is such a wonderful thing. And I can say, thanks to trailblazers like Stacey Abrams, who showed that there is a path. I hope that to see Stacey on the ballot again in 2022. But you got folks like Charles Booker in Kentucky who's doing great things. Val Demings is trying to decide whether or not she's going to run for Senate or governor. But she's such a tremendous talent. You got so many other folks that they're talented. I mean, if Val gets in, you got Charlie Crist and who's thinking about it. You got Nikki Fried who's thinking about it. That's like having a primary with the Avengers, right? You got some amazing talent who's running. We see the same thing in North Carolina in the Senate race right now. 3 tremendous talents there. In Pennsylvania, we're going to have an open seat. Ohio, Tim Ryan just joined in. Mayor Nan is thinking about it in Ohio for governor. So there's so much talent in the Democratic Party right now, and I'm overjoyed to see it. We're going to have some tremendous candidates that are going to do extremely, extremely well. And I want them all to know that they're going to have a DNC right in their corner, fighting right alongside with them.
So I think we got like a complete overview there of basically every race that's happening in 2022. I realized I've mistimed this because we do still have 2 minutes left. So I'm going to sneak in one last question. In 2020, obviously, one of the hugest states was Georgia, flipping from red to blue. A lot of that was credited, as you just mentioned, to Stacey Abrams. I'm wondering which state in 2022 is going to be the Georgia? Which one do you think we're going to see the unexpected flip there and the unexpected Democratic victory?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Which state is next Georgia? The thing that I always tell folks is, Texas is right there. It really is. And I think the old saying, don't mess with Texas, but don't sleep on Texas either. I really do believe with the right candidate, Democrats can maybe pull out that, not maybe, but can pull out the governorship there in Texas. I also say, we're going to have an exciting time here in South Carolina. I think Florida is going to be an interesting place to watch. You got Wisconsin. I mean, getting rid of Senator Johnson, who is just a waste of space. I mean, getting somebody, a talented person there, and they're tremendous talent in that state as well. So you got a lot of possibilities, but I think 2022 will not be a dull midterm, folks. So buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride.
Well, we will be there to cover all of it. Chairman Jaime Harrison with the DNC, thank you again so much for taking the time today and joining us on this day before President Biden's big speech and breaking it down. We really appreciate it. Thanks to you, and thank you to everyone who tuned into the Press Club event today. We hope to see you back in person in the building soon. Until then, everyone, stay safe, and thank you so much for joining us.